Great time. And hopefully next
And maybe even some of us older owners is, but I'm back.
it's tea time, fools.
Hey there, fools! Mizzah Tee here, back with another video. This is a kind of a response to Player Essence, OJ, PlayerEssence.com. He's been a longtime supporter of mine. When I first came in, he was very early on a big supporter of Mizzah Tee show. Always appreciated that. We had kind of a pseudo partnership where he would put my videos up on Player Essence as kind of partnered original content. But yeah, so this is a kind of a response to his response, and I'm not gonna like retread my video. If you want to see the video, Nintendo Innovation Create Standards, go check that out. It's the one before this one, and one of his big points was, yeah, Nintendo innovates, but at what cost? And to that question, I would say whatever the cost is, it's worth it because the industry moves forward. It doesn't become stagnant, and there may be losses, but at the end of the day, the gains are what's most important, are greater. Like I said, I'm a fan of certain things, and the things that I'm a fan of doesn't always succeed, doesn't always win. But boy, do I enjoy the wins a lot better for those teams or for those game companies, because when something that you enjoy wins or does something outstanding or breaks boundaries, it's an even better victory. It's an even bigger victory to you, and so that's why you toil with the losses for your teams, or the things that you find, things that are favorites to you. You toil with the losses because you know those wins are better than anything, and at the end of the day, for me, it's worth it. So, at what cost? Whatever the cost is. If this industry doesn't do new things, it will die. It can improve on what we already have. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Obviously, I don't have a problem with sequels and remakes on the level of the idea of them. But if we don't continue to make things new, push for new ideas and new things, hardware and software, this industry will die. Because that was one of the things that happened with Atari. Atari was making so much similar crap that it just flooded the market, and people bought one thing here and certain things, and most everything else failed, and it crashed. So that's why I said we had to keep going forward. But anyway, oh yeah, one more quick thing. I don't know why I forgot to mention this. The glaring thing is that, oh well, this is a gimmicky blah 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 controller, right? This is a gimmicky controller, even though it has every button, every analog stick that this controller has, which is not a gimmick, or considered a gimmick. And it's you force developers, blah blah blah. You always hear about the forcing. You're forcing developers to develop for this thing here. Well, that's bullshit because even Nintendo, when they didn't have anything definitive to use the gamepad for certain software, this software here, they didn't even use it. The screen on this thing turns completely black, and you play it like a traditional control scheme. Now, if you want to say, well, it's bulky, blah blah blah, that's one thing. I don't feel like that. If you put it's bigger, obviously, but if you hold a Wii U gamepad, it's pretty damn comfortable in your hands. You can say that, and you can say, well, it made the console harder or made the console more expensive. That is also true. That it did make the Wii U more expensive, but Wii U being cheaper doesn't automatically mean it was going to sell better or sell great. It might have sold a little better, but if the games aren't here, if people are complaining about the architecture or the weakness of it, then it wouldn't matter how cheap this thing is because you won't have the games and therefore it won't sell. So spare me the complaint that, oh, developers had to program their games for this thing, because they didn't. Nintendo didn't. And Nintendo even didn't. Yeah, you can play off TV play with if you want to, but if you're playing on your TV screen, you can. This thing looks just like it is now, completely black. You don't have to do anything for it if you didn't want to. And as far as I know, Nintendo didn't force developers to use this. As far as I know, I could be wrong. I don't think I am. If I'm wrong, send me an article. But they didn't force developers to use the touchscreen or to use the screen. So you can play a traditional experience, traditional quote-unquote regular experience with the gamepad. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out before I forgot. The other thing I wanted to address was the kind of ongoing narrative that Nintendo needs to do this, needs to do that to find success. We have definitive answers, definitive perspectives on what they need to do to find success, so what's gonna work. And one of the many things that keeps coming up is that, oh well, the hardware is hard to program for. That's obvious, and obviously with the response video, the controllers, the gimmicks, all these things. All right, so what I want to do is I want to try to give another side of that, combat that. And so I have a bunch of systems here. We got the Sega Saturn right here. You don't realize how dusty shit is until you start filming it. The Sega Saturn is up in here. I have the Nintendo GameCube here. I have the Sega Dreamcast here, and I have the PlayStation 4 here. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about was one of the things that keeps coming up about what Nintendo needs to do to be successful and to make a successful console that third parties will love. Okay, so right here we have the GameCube, and I have a video about the GameCube, Nintendo GameCube proves anti-Nintendo bias. If you want to check that out, it's way back. Maybe I'll put a link in the description. I thought it was pretty good. And so I gave reasons to why I felt like there was a bias when Nintendo, to me, gave everything that the industry wanted, that I thought, So, one of the things they say about the Wii U, that's said about the Wii U, right, rightfully so, I guess, is that the architecture is, for one thing, it's not powerful. It's not as powerful or powerful enough to do these games that come out on Xbox One and PS4, and that's probably true. And that also that it's it's harder to program for because of the architecture. Okay, so here we have the Nintendo GameCube, which was very easy to program for. Had a disc media, albeit a smaller disc media, but it had disc media, and if your game didn't fit on one disc, you could easily put it on 2 or more discs, which we had been doing. We did that in the 5th gen with no problems. You had Final Fantasy games on multiple discs. You had plenty of games on multiple discs, so that shouldn't have been a detriment, even though that's what people will say. Oh, it was those mini discs. Okay, so why was it a big thing to put multiple discs on the GameCube system and not that on a PS1 or even Xbox 360 had multiple disc games that the PS4 could do on one, or PS3 could do on one disc. So, all right, so you have easy to program for, hands down, easy. You have pretty much just a regular controller, no real gimmicks, no, it had the big A button, if you want to call that a gimmick, but it was really comfortable. One of the most comfortable Nintendo controllers out there. And so you had that. And then you had a lot cheaper licensing fees, a little bit more expensive than the PS2 and I guess Xbox original at the time, but very comparable. We're talking about a couple of dollars difference. So you had all those things. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but this was a powerful console. More powerful than the PS2, and it sometimes, in certain games, looked as powerful as the slightly more powerful original Xbox. Especially if you look at a launch title like the Rogue Squadron, the Rogue Squadron series. You look at the Metroid Prime series on here. These were beautiful games. Very powerful system at the time. So it had a pretty traditional controller, very powerful, easy to program for, and yet it still quote unquote failed to reach mass appeal. Why is that? Is it because of Nintendo? I mean, like I said, I felt like there's a bias during this system especially, and that's one of the reasons it's failed. But it had everything else going for it. Yeah, it didn't have the internet to the, but even at that time, other than Xbox Live, the internet or, multiplayer gaming online wasn't that big of a thing yet until kind of mid-generation when it started picking up. All right, then you have here Sega Dreamcast. Powerful console for its time, more powerful than anything else out there on the console market. Traditional controller, with some quirks. It had had the memory, the UMD, not UMD. What am I talking about? That's PSP. Had the I can't even think what it's called right now. The memory card that had the screen. It had the slide in rumble thing, kind of like the N64. It had the expansion slot for the controller, but it was a traditional, quote unquote, traditional controller. Very easy to program for. Windows CE operating system. So easy to program for that people were hacking and making burning games, and that's one of the things that hurt the console or hurt the software sales. But really easy to program for, obviously. A lot of PC games came over to the Dreamcast and whatnot. Here you can see right there, the Windows CE operating system, which is one of the things that led their partnership with Microsoft for the original Xbox. Like I said, all those things, and it still failed. And this is Sega. Sega had a big name. Sega was beloved, regardless of how you felt about, this system here, Saturn. Yeah, that's going to be actually the next part of this little video here. The Saturn had pretty much all those things right. Well, not many of those things right. One of the glaring things was that, yes, it was powerful. It was a powerful console, especially for 2D games, but not as much for 3D games because of it was really hard to program for. It had the traditional controller, yes. It was coming off a very successful console in Genesis, and a console that actually beat, quote unquote, beat hardware sales of Super Nintendo, that in Genesis Super Nintendo generation. So it had a lot of goodwill going toward this console. But the one glaring thing was that, man, it was excruciatingly, I don't want to say excruciatingly hard, but it was definitely very hard to program for because of the architecture. And it failed. So you have these failed consoles. This one being, said it was the hardware. It was hard to program for hardware. These ones, I'm not really sure. I mean, people say it was the disc on this one, but I just explained why that makes 0 sense. And there was no quote unquote gimmicky controller. And then you have the Dreamcast, which got everything right as far as I'm concerned. The games were, there was awesome games on it. The controller was good. It was easy and cheap to program for. It had it had a freaking Windows operating system. So very easy to port games to it. And still failed. And so this one failed as well. The hard programming for it. But if these things are definitive, if these are definitive answers to why, and I think I explained that to me these aren't definitive answers because I just gave you some reasons why. What about this thing? This thing had everything against it. Completely new architecture. Sony wanted to basically create their own computers. They wanted this chipset to be the new standard, quote unquote standard for computers. They had got so, if you want to say full of themselves, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that. They had success and they were trying something to make them even more successful. I don't know if it's being arrogant, but they this, setup, this chipset was just completely foreign to pretty much to the developers. It was not very developer friendly at all. This thing was super expensive. This console was super expensive, and yes, it got cheaper once they took everything out of it, which was, a sad occurrence, but necessary. And it got, sold more. But the one thing that supposedly killed this system, the main reason, the only reason that supposedly killed this system, and also killed this system, apparently, was one, power, and two, architecture for Wii U. It wasn't just, people don't just say it's the power. Power, people also, or architecture, people also say it's the power. Which, we, but, that was, again, there's no definitive answers for any of this stuff. I can dispute your answer, and you can give me a different reason to why something failed when it was supposed to have, or something succeeded when it was supposed to fail. Grandma's, blah, blah, blah. You've heard all the arguments. Anyway, back to the PS3. The thing that should have killed it didn't matter. Why? Why didn't the architecture, the super hard to program for console didn't matter? That didn't change through the whole life. It was always super hard to program for. It was the same chipset. All that stuff remained. That should have pushed developers away, right? Because that's what you guys say about, Saturn, and that's what's said about the Wii U, is the architecture. You can't port games easily. And that never changed with this console. Yeah, developers may have gotten a little better with programming, but it was still very hard to program for this thing. But it still kept getting ports, albeit weaker ports than this console right here, which was, weaker, but had games that performed better because of the architecture, right? Because it was harder to program for this than it was for this. This is a lot closer to PC. It was very friendly to developers. And so this console didn't fail. And why is that? With all these definitive reasons why things fail and don't fail, why didn't that happen to this bad boy? Because of Sony's influence in the gaming market. That's why. Had nothing to do with that. People pushed through all the barriers with this console, the super high price, the hard to program for, the architecture. They pushed through that and made subpar games, and all the way through all the subpar multiplats, most of the well, I don't know, I haven't bought that many first party stuff, but most of the first party stuff on here was pretty stellar. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Uncharted series, and Uncharted was awesome on the PS3. So, but most of the ported stuff, it was better on the 360 because it was easy to program for. But it didn't matter. Developers didn't stop programming, didn't stop. They kept pushing through. I'm sure people went crazy making games for this console, porting games to this console, but they still did it. They pushed through. Why? Because of Sony's influence, Sony's market, Sony's money, and that's it. So there's no definitive reason why something fails. It's easy to say, well, this is the reason it failed when something fails. And the funny thing is, some of the reasons that they say the Wii U failed are touted as being reasons why the Wii didn't, or the Wii succeeded. Gimmicky controller, blah, blah, blah. That didn't stop the Wii from succeeding. I know it was lightning in the bottle and, grandmas and blah, 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 blah. But again, there's always gray area. There's always nuances to every argument. And I think that was the main, that's one of the main things I try to point out, is there's no definitive answer for this stuff. Some things fail, some things don't. There's no reason this thing should have failed. Yeah, Sony or Sega ran out of money because of the past problems, but this thing should have sold so well, and it did initially. It should have sold so well that none of that mattered. Well, it didn't have a DVD player. Gamers wanted a DVD player. That is true to why the PS2 sold so much better. But this thing should not have failed just because it didn't have a DVD player. This is a gaming console. Gamers should have responded to this. It was cheaper than the PS3 or PS2 by $100. If you wanted, you know, it's a gaming console. It was a great one. It had, it was the first console to have online multiplayer. Game console to have online multiplayer. So yeah, I mean, to me, this sums it up. It sums it up that you can't sum it up all the time. There's no definitive answer. So when guys spout out, oh man, it better have this, it better have that, it better have all these things to be successful, you might have, you might be in the ballpark, you might help with some of those things, but none of those things are definitive reasons something is going to do well or not do well. At the end of the day, this is the market. The market is fickle. The market is funny. And, they choose winners and losers, and a lot of it's just a whim. It's just luck. It's good timing. It's all that stuff combined. There's no definitive reason why something failed. You can't just say, all right, Nintendo make a GameCube-like console. Make a GameCube-like console. Give me a standard controller, and you'll find success. That's no guarantee. See? No guarantee. So that's my response to the response. It's kind of, my response to sentiment in the community. And, let me know what you think. Do you think, no, there are definitive reasons why everything fails if something fails? Because definitively, the Wii shouldn't have done that great. It was weak, had a gimmicky controller, all those things, and it didn't fail. But, I know grandmas and grandpas and all that stuff. But me pointing that out shows you that nothing's definitive. Okay? When it comes to video games and gaming and the market and who wins and who loses, there's nothing that's definitive. You have to factor in all these things, and then you gotta, leave luck to heaven. Alright, fools, that's it for this one. Peace out.
Oh yeah, one more thing. Play Nintendo, fools. Thank you all for watching Mizzah Tee Show.